Our first speaker is John F. McManus, longtime Public Relations Director for the John Birch Society and now President of the John Birch Society. In introducing all three of these supervisors, CEOs of the John Birch Society, it gives me great pleasure to know that all three of them started as chapter leaders right down here at the bottom, and they've worked their way to the top of the John Birch Society. So without further ado, let's welcome John F. McManus, President of John Birch Society.
Thank you, Mike. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. It's nice to be back down south. I talked to my wife this morning, and she told me we just had 7 more fresh inches of snow, and it's nice to be back down south. Right. I heard a story about a senator from up north who came down to the Carolinas, and he was campaigning to be the president, so he was telling everybody about all these new programs that he was going to start, and a little old lady jumped up and she said, "Where are you going to get all the money to pay for this?" And he said, "From taxes, ma'am, from taxes." You know. And the audience in the whole place just erupted in applause. And so later he's saying to his aide, he said, Did you understand what happened there? He said, "I told people that I was going to raise their taxes and they all applauded." Big round of applause, and the fellow says, "They thought you said Texas." Now, I understand that people down this part of the country don't understand the way we talk, you know. But I don't have an accent. You folks do. Well, I got 2 subjects I want to talk about here tonight. I'm not going to be the lengthy part of this program, but I just want to tell you that I think the evidence that a fellow named Clinton's in trouble is really mounting. And this might seem a little frivolous, but it's not. For instance, didn't we get a lot of stories about Chelsea going off to college, right? And what wonderful parents they are. And so I think probably the biggest story about the fact that Chelsea went off to college is that means there's one more room in the White House for sale, you know. But, you know, it was followed now, all of a sudden. Now, what they're doing is giving us distractions. Don't focus on Clinton's little idiosyncrasies or his small little sins, his peccadillos. They're not so pecca anymore. That means small, you know. I mean, no, the dillo part is the small part. They're peccamagnas, you know. But anyhow, all of a sudden we start seeing about what a great golfer he is. And he's just a real family man, right? Distract you from this, right? Pretty soon they start telling us about he's getting a new dog, right? And then we go through a whole week of finding out what they're going to call the dog. They end up calling the dog Buddy, and he tells us about his uncle. He had an uncle named Buddy, and now he's naming the dog after Buddy, and so forth. I don't know if I'd be happy about they named a dog after me. I don't know, but all right. Then we find out that the dog's fighting the cat. Socks the cat, now they're fighting. And isn't this all just good family stuff, right? And isn't it a wonderful family we have in the White House, and aren't they wonderful people? And then the pièce de résistance comes along, and now we see pictures of them on television. The president and his wife and his daughter are down on a beach in the West Indies somewhere, and they're taking pictures of them dancing on the beach. How many of you saw the dance? Now, didn't they tell us that the president and his wife were a little bit upset about this invasion of their privacy? Ladies and gentlemen, if you think a TV camera can get close to the president on a beach without the Secret Service allowing it, you don't know what goes on. That was all carefully staged. Now, why would they go about staging something like that if they weren't in trouble? If they're not trying to distract people away from the growing sentiment to impeach Clinton now. And it is growing. Now, where do you folks figure in all this? He's not going to be impeached by me or by any one of you individually. He's going to be impeached if you do your job in your congressional districts and get your congressman to stand tall and do what a congressman should do. I want you all to go out of here tonight and saying, I'm going to do my part. I'm going to get to be a part of this. I'm going to join this committee. You get a big, thick packet of information if you do. You get all the tools you need. You get plenty of these petitions. You start thinking to yourself about shopping centers, setting up a table, getting a bunch of people out at the post office on a Saturday morning, coming by. And you approach people and you say, have you heard about this Impeach Clinton campaign? And every other one will say, hey, yeah, that's a good idea. Let me sign. And the next one will say, oh, that's a terrible thing. And then just forget them. Go to the next one. But I'll bet down in this part of the country, you might even get more than half of the people. You get a couple of thousand signatures from this district for this congressman, he'll sit up and take notice. We've been told by members of Congress that they're not going to act until they get some information from back home, that they're not going to pay for doing it. They need the stimulus that comes from the people. When Richard Nixon was about to face impeachment, it came from the media. It's not coming from the media this time, is it? The media loves Bill Clinton. If it's going to come from anywhere, it's going to come from the people. That's you, that's me, that's all of us in this room, and people like you all across the country. It can be done. Let me assure you, there's going to be a lot more reasons why Mr. Clinton should be impeached. We've got this program in place. We're right on the cusp of a big explosion of this sentiment, and you can find it, you can mobilize it. I want you to do it. Okay, now, change the subject a little bit. I would guess that most of you have heard the famous fable of the emperor's new clothes. The little boy told the king he was naked, and he was. And what we need is a little boy now. It doesn't have to be a little boy. It can be a big boy. It can be a big girl. It can be a member of the Birch Society to just go around and say, why don't we stop trying to decide which of these alternatives they give us we should take when both of them are losers? Aren't we constantly being presented with alternatives, neither of which is the answer to the problem? Should we let Poland and Hungary and the Czech Republic into NATO, or shouldn't we? Right? I mean, we might offend the Russians if we do, and others to say, oh, it's a good idea to do so. There's a missing alternative. Give them our seat. We're out of there. Let's not debate on their terms. Let's not choose one of their alternatives. Always say to yourself, what's missing? Should Alan Greenspan raise interest rates, or should he keep them at the present level or maybe lower them? Who the heck ever gave him the power to set the interest rates in the first place? Should we extend school hours for preschoolers? Should we extend school hours until supper time? Which do you want to choose? How about if we get the federal government out of education that doesn't belong there in the first place? Should we pay our UN dues or shouldn't we? Let's not argue dues. Let's get out. Get out like getting out of NATO. Should we bail out the Asians? Should we bail out Mexico again? Should we bail... Incredible. These are the alternatives that we're being given. Do not focus on the real problem. And just like the little boy with the emperor's new clothes, you've got to go to people and say, you know, they're not even talking about the real issue here. Isn't it about time we talked about the real issue? And don't they do this to us in the political realm? They give us a phony Republican or they give us a phony Democrat, and they say, there are your choices. Well, down at the congressional level, quite frequently, we do get a decent choice. But as far as up at the presidential level, it's been a long time. Well, ladies and gentlemen, what we've got to do in the John Birch Society is what we've always done, and that is uphold the standard. Uphold the standard. Something Bob Dole didn't do, and something George Bush didn't do, and these are supposed to be the alternatives to the socialists and the world government people. No, they didn't do it. The principles weren't even discussed. It's all political. It's all, well, we'll try and get along, or we'll try to make the socialistic program a little bit less onerous, or sometimes a little bit worse. some leadership we're getting there. No, we don't want that at all. I'd like to suggest to you that you start looking at the very first sentence in the Constitution. We all talk about the Constitution. If you haven't read it through, you should. Things will jump out at you, especially if you've been in the Birch Society for a while. All of a sudden, read it again, and things will jump out at you. And like, golly, there it is. But that first sentence, all legislative powers herein granted shall be vested in Congress. All of them in Congress? Can a Supreme Court decision be the law of the land? How can it be if all legislative powers in Congress? It's not. It's the law. It's the law of the case. How about executive orders from the executive branch that take the force of law? Is that proper? No. All legislative powers in Congress. But it says all legislative powers herein granted are vested in Congress. Herein granted, within the pages of that short document. If the power is not herein granted in those few pages, it's illicit. I defy you to find foreign aid, education, housing, transportation, energy, medicine, welfare. None of it's there. None of it is herein granted. Now, I know a lot of people that rely on the 10th Amendment, which is simply a reaffirmation of herein granted. And I'd like you to start focusing on that as well. And we got to get the Congress of the United States, the whole government, back under the Constitution that they've all sworn an oath to, and most of them have never even read it. You talk to a lawyer friend, ask him about his constitutional law classes, and undoubtedly he'll tell you that when he studied Constitution law, all they studied were recent cases of the Supreme Court. They never even opened the Constitution. I've had a lot of lawyers tell me that. I said, you were cheated. Well, they don't like to hear that, but all of a sudden they start thinking about it. And so I'd like you to start thinking about all legislative powers herein granted are vested in Congress, no place else, and no powers other than those within those pages. If we do that, and then we start telling people, look, you're not even discussing the real issue. You're discussing false alternatives. Whichever one you pick of the alternatives they're giving you, you lose. Don't let them do that to you. And you can help a lot of people understand how they're being snookered, how they're being given false alternatives. Well, that's enough from me. You got a couple of my colleagues to talk to now. It's a delight to be back down south again. I always tell people wherever I am, I'll be back. I promise. Thank you.